Hey everybody, this is Meyer, and what I want to do in this video, I'm actually going to be starting a new series on uplifting trance sound design. And what we'll be doing in this video is creating a big trance supersaw. I'll play the sound for you, but also if you like this sound, go ahead, I'll leave a link in the description. I have a bank that I've done with Trance Producer Reorder. We've made over 130 different presets, and for Vital, we spent a lot of time doing it, and I think they sound great for uplifting trance and melodic techno. So if you find this video helpful, definitely check out that bank because there's a lot more sounds like this in there. So this is a sound we're going to be making today, and it's a big trance supersaw. This is what it sounds like. Cool, let's go ahead and start making the sound. So what I've done here is just created a new live set. I'm going to set the tempo to 138 beats per minute, and I'll go ahead and grab the MIDI that I want to use here under my projects. Here it is. I'm going to go ahead and drop it in arrangement view and bump that in there. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab Vital from my plugins. Just search Vital, boom, there it is. Put it there on the MIDI channel. And while we're here, I might as well just duplicate this a few times so we have, without the MIDI. So we have some Vitals ready to go for the other sounds. And this one is going to be Trance Lead, boom, that's good. Now this isn't going to sound like much now, but as we go ahead and make this sound, I think it'll start coming together. So this is what it sounds like now with an initialized preset. Yeah, not much, but we'll get it. We'll get it there. Make this a little bit bigger. Perfect. So what I'm going to do to start with is we'll go ahead and start with oscillator 1, and I'm going to bump this up to 9 voices. And set the unison down to 18%, so you can hear. Let's hear what this sounds like. And rather than have this unison detune power be here, I want this to be a little bit more linear, so I'm going to probably set this to about 0.5. And the really important thing for this sound is getting this envelope right. I used to do this a lot, and my sounds were sounding really cheesy. Don't want any attack pretty much at all. And I found that I needed to have released my sound. So we'll set the decay down to maybe about half a second or so. And we're going to set this release actually maybe about 0.7 seconds. And I want to bring this down pretty sharply so that way we get this attack. And this will help a lot when we actually eventually do add a compressor. Sounding good. I'm going to go ahead and add in oscillator 2. I'm going to bump this up an octave, so 12 semitones up, turn the level all the way down, and bump the unison up to 9 voices. Now what I want to do is have this to be a little less detuned because this is even higher up in the frequency range, so I don't want to cause too many problems. Bump this up to 13%. And I want this actually to have this detune power in a negative direction, so I think I'm going to do about maybe -2. So once we have that, we'll go ahead and mix this in. Now, one thing that's really important is you have your phase randomization all the way to 100% for both of these. Otherwise, what happens is it sounds like that. You don't want that, so be sure it's at 100%. You want each note having a random phase. That's what gives it that big, lush sound. So let's go ahead and mix in this second oscillator. This one's an octave above, and this will really help brighten the sound up. Sounding good. Now what I'm going to do is move over to the filter section. I'm going to use the digital 12 dB per octave filter, and the reason for this is I find that this 12 dB digital filter sounds a lot like either the Virus or the JP8000. The Virus uses 12 dB per octave filters by default, and I think this digital filter may have even been modeled after the Roland JP8080 or 8000. I have an 8080 sitting on my desk, along with two Virus TIs too. One of them you can see behind me. So just that experience kind of helps me get these sounds in the right direction here. So we want to make sure oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 are going through filter 1. And we can do this either by mapping them here, or you can click on these buttons. It does the same exact thing. So we'll go ahead and map this filter cutoff to the mod wheel. So we'll start it all the way down. That way, what happens is, as we open up the mod wheel, we're positively opening up the filter cutoff. So what I like to do to map the mod wheel is set the filter cutoff at the minimum point, which here I want it to be completely closed, and then add the modulation in the positive direction to where I want it to eventually be the maximum. And that's what this will now sweep that entire range here. You can see that on there. Sounding good. I also want to add a filter envelope, which I'm going to use envelope 2 for. So we'll shorten this down to about maybe half a second, and no attack and maybe some release, but it doesn't matter too much. And we're just going to modulate this here onto the filter as well. So what this will do is give it a plucky sound, and I don't need too much automation, so maybe 25 or something like that. That way when the filter is closed, you get that kind of plucky sound. Sounding good to me. The last thing I want to do is add in a white noise oscillator. Now, one of the problems with the white noise oscillator here is we don't have control over the filter of it. So what I'm actually going to do is route the white noise into filter 2, and then route filter 2 into filter 1. So what's going on here is the white noise is going to go through filter 2 first, and then the output of filter 2, which is only the white noise, is then going to go to filter 1. And the way I'm going to do this is I want this to be a high pass filter. So let me turn these off so you get to hear what's going on here. This is really important, because if I didn't map it to the filter, I just mapped it to filter 1. Lots of low mid information I don't want. So we're going to make sure it goes through filter 2 first, which then goes to filter 1, and both of these need to be going to filter 1. The other thing I want to do is, rather than have this follow envelope 1, which by default is the amplitude envelope, I mean, it will do that too, but what I'd like to do instead is actually map a new envelope, which I'm going to use envelope 3 for, to just be the noise amount. That way the noise only comes in for that initial attack, and it'll help it cut through the mix. So now envelope 3 is basically the volume, and as soon as it pops in, it's gonna quickly close in volume. So this is what it sounds like. And with the other sounds. Just want to make sure we have a little bit of resonance here. That just helps it cut through. That's sounding good for the basics of the sound. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and move on over to the effects section, where we need to add a few things. The first thing I want to do is add a reverb, because this sound is sounding very dry. Now normally what I would do is use all these sounds to be dry and bust them together, bust all my leads and have reverb and delay and then a compressor on them. But for this, I don't want to be using any external VSTs. I want this to be DAW agnostic. So what we'll do instead is we'll do the reverb built into Vital. And Vital actually has a really good reverb. So let's go through what all these parameters do. This low cut here is the low cut and the high cut of the reverb itself. So this is going to control basically how bright the reverb and how dark it is. So I want this to at least be at, let's say, 90 Hertz because I don't want this mud of the reverb clouding up the mix at all. And the high cut around 7,000, so it's not too bright and interfering with the transient either. This controls the overall tone of the reverb, so I do want to low shelf it just a hair, which is what this will do. And let's go ahead and look at some of the parameters. First thing is the mix. This controls how much of the reverb is cutting through. The mix at 0 is going to be completely dry. Mix at 100% is going to be only the reverb signal. And because this is trance and we want a lot of reverb, we're going to set this at 20%. So that's 20% of the reverb signal and 80% of the original signal. That's what this sounds like. A little too much noise, so I'm going to bring this down to maybe 20%, 0.2. The time I want to boost this up to maybe about 5 seconds. So we make sure this is the decay or the length of the reverb. Just kind of really helps give it that tail. And I'm going to bump the size up to about 70%, which controls about the size of the room that we have. Sounding good. I think I am going to increase the mix maybe to about 23%. And the last thing I want to do is just add a hair of delay, which this is a pre-delay, which means it's going to cause this reverb tail not to wash over the first 0.05 seconds of the sound, which means that transient that we have from the noise and from this amplitude envelope is going to be allowed to cut through a little bit better. So let's hear what this sounds like. %25 of the noise. It's like Goldilocks. You got to find that sweet spot there. Sounding good. Next up, I'm going to add a delay. Now, what I want to do is add a ping pong delay at at eighth notes. And the reason for this is I'm playing 16th notes and the melody is being arpeggiated at dotted eighth notes, which is 3/16 notes. So what this 1/8 delay is going to do is kind of fill in some of those gaps. The feedback controls how many delays there are, or basically what the fallout is. So a large feedback means a lot of delays, and a low feedback means not as many. We don't need it to be as many because we're playing a lot of notes. And this mix is way too much. I'm going to just bring this all the way down to 10%. Let's hear what this sounds like with just the delay. That's good. It doesn't need to be a lot. It's just there to give it a little bit of tail and a little bit of space. And I want to take out some of the low end of the delay as well. Sounding good. And with the reverb. Maybe a little too much reverb. I'm going to bump this down to 20%. Maybe with that delay in there, we're losing the original sound a little bit too much. Next, I'm going to add a little bit of saturation here. I'm going to use this warm drive, the soft clip, which is kind of like a warm drive, and just add this a little bit. It's going to warm up the sound and even it out a little bit. That's a good amount here. You see too much and we lose that transient because we're actually wave shaping the sound, but it does kind of give it a little bit of warmth and a little bit of energy, so that's what I like about it. The last thing we're going to do is add this compressor, and this compressor is going to be added after the delay and reverb to help glue all of these parts of the sound together. What's important here is that we set the attack and the release right. This compressor, it starts off at 100%, very aggressive. What this compressor, I want it to do is let the initial transient of the sound through and then clamp down on the delay and reverb and the rest of the sound to kind of glue it all together and make it cohesive. So I want to start by putting these to about 6 dB, all these bands. We'll adjust this in a minute, but just as a starting point. And what you drag here, this is actually the ratio. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't tell you the ratio, at least not in this version. So what I'm trying to do, I'm going to start these at around 33% and then adjust this mix amount and these volumes to get the sounding pretty balanced. Actually, before I do this, I'm going to add an EQ because this compressor is a nonlinear device, which basically means it's going to affect the sound in a different way based on the volume, which means I should add this equalizer first to get the volume right before sending it through the compressor. So we're going to add the EQ. And what I want to do with the EQ is low shelf it a little bit and high shelf it a little bit. Now, the reason I'm doing this is most songs, when they're mixed or mastered, they have a 4.5 dB slope, which is very musically pleasing. A sawtooth wave, like these sawtooths here, they drop over at a 6 dB slope, a minus 6 dB per octave slope, because the harmonics are related as 1/n. So this is going to help make this sound a little bit more pleasing, and it's going to help it cut through. And if you're having trouble with your leads, it's probably because the EQ tilt isn't matching what your reference curve is or what you want. So this is what we have to do. And in fact, the JP8000 that Roland has actually uses a high-pass super saw to make, or a high-pass sawtooth wave to make the super saw, which really helps that low end from building up and muddying it up. So this is kind of what we're doing with this. We're scooping out a little bit of the low end and then brightening the sound up. So this is what it sounds like without it and with it. So that's helping quite a bit. Just kind of even out the sound. Now we'll move on to the multiband compressor, which is where we're going to spend some time making sure that we're gluing the reverb and delay to the sound the way we want to. And we may end up needing to bring the reverb amount up because we're clamping down on it. So let's see. That's actually plenty of reverb. So what these bands are is the threshold for each band, and then this is the sort of gain of when it's kind of the threshold and then the volume. Maybe a little too much reverb. I'm going to dial this back a hair and maybe bump up the delay to maybe 12%. That's sounding great. What we'll do in the next video is we'll make a sub pad sound that'll sit underneath this for the main breakdown section. See you in the next video.